Hello everyone, my name is Brooke and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I've recently learned on BookTube tags are a thing. This was such an early YouTube thing. I loved watching these from people 2016, 2015, that era of YouTube. So to learn that tags are very much a thing in the book community brings me an immense level of joy. Even though it is now the end of July, I still wanted to participate in this one because it is still the middle of the year. To me, honestly, the middle of the year feels like the end of July because that's halfway through summer. School for me always ended in June and started again in September, and I still feel that way. So I feel like this tag is still relevant. As for freaking out, I haven't looked at my Goodreads yet this year. I've never met a Goodreads goal, so I don't feel like I'm super pressured, but I'm also not one to force myself, hunker down and read books. If I don't want to read, I don't feel like reading, I'm just not going to read. That's just not how I operate. So a Goodreads goal is more of just a motivation step for me. It does make me want to read more. I love tracking my goal. It's just something fun for me. My Goodreads goal for the past couple of years has been 52 books. This is, of course, a book for every week of the year, one book a week. I know I'm behind. I'm definitely behind because I have not read one book every single week this year. For the month of February, I only read one book the entire month. A lot of months, I've only read 3 books. Some months though, I've read 7 or 8. I'm really not sure where I stand right now, depending on if I feel like I'm in a reading slump, what I have going on that month, if I feel motivated to read or have time to read, really depends on that. So let's take a look at my Goodreads goal. So right now, I am at 26 out of 52 books, which puts me at 4 books behind schedule. And that does actually include one book that I DNF'd and then put back on my TBR shelf. So that one in my head doesn't really count. So realistically, we are 5 books behind at 25 out of 52 books read this year. But that's okay. We still have August, September, October, November, December. That's 5 months to catch up. I know that my fall reading is always high numbers, always, because I adore reading in the fall. I think it's such a cozy little vibe, and once we get to Christmas books, I'm going to be going through those like you wouldn't believe. As soon as the weather outside starts getting gross, I start staying inside and reading. For this tag, I will put all of the questions in the description down below. Question number 1, what's the best book I read in 2024? Now, I would have to say the best book I read in 2024 was actually a book I read really recently, and I hate to say it's kind of cliche because I know so many people have read it and have talked about it, but it was Daisy Jones and the Six. I just finished this book quite literally a week ago, and it was a much needed sense of relief because I had not had a 5-star read since January. I was really struggling. I had a lot of 4s and then I had a lot of 3s and 2s, but I had not had a 5-star read since January. And picking this up, reading it was such a breath of fresh air for me. Something I was so not expecting. It follows the story of the band Daisy Jones and the Six, their members as the band formed until the band breaks up, and it's set as a retelling in modern day. So the year in this case is 2012, and an interviewer is talking to each of the members of the band, getting them to recount their story. So it's set in the present of the people in the present recounting the past of the story. I was really at first thrown off by the format of this book because it is set up like a script or an interview. I'm not sure how well you can see, but essentially it says the character's name and then what they say in the interview. So, you know, Daisy, paragraph, Billy, what Billy says in the interview, Nick, what Nick says in the interview. And the entire book is set up like that. At first I wasn't really fond of this. I found I couldn't read it in big chunks because it did take a little bit of time to get used to. But after I got about a quarter of the way through the book, I zoomed and I started understanding why it was written in that perspective and really enjoying it. One of my favorite things was how the characters could recount stories of what happened and recount an event that happened, but have completely different perspectives on the situation and what happened. So you never actually know the truth of whose story's right, whose story's wrong, and I think it just says a lot about how our brain changes situations over time, how our brain morphs things based on our own individual belief systems, and it was really, really interesting to me. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. I was wondering, okay, I know this is gonna happen. When's this character gonna do this? Are they gonna do this? When's it gonna happen? There is a little bit of romance between two of the members of the Six that I was really rooting for in this novel. So I was waiting for that to kind of play out how I wanted it to, and I won't tell you whether it did or didn't. And I was also waiting for the character Billy in the novel to do something as well that did end up happening. And then there's this shocker at the end that of course I'm not going to spoil, that just, this book had me and I adored it. The best sequel I've read so far in 2024, one of the only other books I actually rated 5 stars in 2024, and it is going to be A Court of Mist and Fury from Sarah J Maas, part of the ACOTAR series. This was the second book in the series, and after reading the first one, I had no idea what was going to happen. I feel like a lot of people have read this series now, so I can talk about it. But in the first book, we all thought collectively, we are all reading this book, we thought for sure that Feyre was going to be with Tamlin. That is what the first book is about. And then we get to the second book. I was on the edge of my seat every step of the way in that book. And then we get to the ending with her sisters, and I'm just, I am on the edge of my seat. And the way Sarah J Maas has you transform your opinion on these characters from the beginning of the book to the end of the book has me shocked. You are set in a way, she sets it up so you think about them in this negative light right at the beginning of the book, and the whole Night Court, you think of them in such a negative perspective, and you see everyone loving them and you're like, I don't understand how in any way my perception on these characters is going to change. I just don't see it happening. And then by the end of your book you're like, oh, I get it. And that is why I loved A Court of Mist and Fury so much. I think there was so much character development in that book, so much plot building for the rest of the books as well. It was my favorite book out of that whole series, and I think we're still gonna get more books in that series, actually. We'll see what happens. I really, really enjoyed the second one. New releases you haven't read yet but want to. So these are books that have already come out. So we have The Fiancé Dilemma. I went and picked this up actually on release day, and it is sitting on my TBR shelf right now. Once I finish the book I'm currently reading, I believe that is the book I'm going to pick up next. I have A Fate Inked in Blood. This is definitely going to be a fall read for me. Really exciting to read and get more into the fantasy side of that. The Magnolia Park series in a whole, I know they came out with a new book for that this year, and I haven't touched that series whatsoever, so I kind of want to do a deep dive and just binge the whole series at once. I have not read Iron Flame at all, and I know there was the second one that came out and the third one was announced, so definitely books I want to pick up. And then Throne of Glass, of course I read ACOTAR, so I need to read Throne of Glass, and Crescent City as well, but I've heard Throne of Glass needs to be read second. That is a big commitment though, and unless I can get it at the library or on Kindle Unlimited, it's also unfortunately an expensive commitment. So I need to figure out in what format I can read those books before I go into reading them, because spending like hundreds of dollars to read those books in like a month is not really attainable for me. My most anticipated release for the second half of the year is Daydream by Hannah Grace. I am not sure why I'm so excited for this, because the only other book I've read from Hannah Grace is Icebreaker, and I did not like it. I'm not on the Icebreaker bandwagon. That book was just, I didn't really find there was any plot to it. It just wasn't good, and it was a struggle to read. But Daydream, for some reason, I'm very excited, and it's been on my release radar for a while. One of the main reasons may be that the main character in the book is A, in the library, and B, wearing a folklore cardigan. And that's on judging a book by its cover. The biggest book surprise for me, this right here, Elise on Love, was the biggest book surprise for me that I've read so far this year. I have seen this sitting around for a while. It's been in the bookstores, I don't even know what year it came out, like maybe 2 years ago. It was one of the forward-facing ones in the bookstore for the longest time, which I understand because I have so much beef with the way the spine looks and the color of the spine. I wish it was not black, and I wish it was the full width. Either way, I have so much beef. So I understand why it's forward facing, but something about this cover told me this was going to be a 2 or 3 star rom-com. And I saw no way around that. Something in my head just said this is going to be a 2 or 3 star rom-com. When I saw it on Book Outlet for $5, I was like, yeah, I'll get it. Why not? Like, it gives me something to read. It's lighthearted. If it's 3 stars, like, who cares? It's cheap. Let me tell you, I fell in love with this story. I went through it so fast. I enjoyed Jack a lot, who is the male lead. I really enjoyed Sadie. I really enjoyed the way Sadie started her own business in this book, and it was about so much more than just the romance. I believe I ended up giving this like 4.5 stars, and it's now a permanent fixture on my shelf. I thought this was going to be, you know, a 2-3 star book on the shelf, sell on Facebook Marketplace or donate and out. No, this is going to be a book that I reread again. I'm probably going to end up annotating it. I really enjoyed this story. Authors that are either debut this year or at least new to me. I read my first Abby Mendez book this year, Part of Your World. I then followed it up with yours truly, and Just for the Summer is the book I'm reading right now. I am obsessed with her writing, and I can't wait to read more books in the future. I also have a book by Jenny Holiday, who is a Canadian author, and I definitely want to shout out and read more Canadian authors this year. This is not Jenny Holiday's first release, but it is a release that did come out this year and is my first book that I read from her. A lot of Americans try to write about Canadians, especially in the sports romance genre. I wasn't really into sports romances either before picking this up, but I feel like having a Canadian hockey player worked out so well for this book because it was written by a Canadian. So there weren't those I mean, of course there were some stereotypes, but they were actually well written. The wording and the phrasing that the male lead does use as a Canadian actually made sense, and the Canadian things that are in here actually made sense. And I feel like a lot of books about Canadians written by Americans, it just doesn't flow nicely, so this I found was actually really nice and legit in that sense. I do want to read more by Jenny Holiday because I do want to support Canadian, and like I said, I did really enjoy this book. New fictional crush. We have Miles from Funny Story. This is the new Emily Henry book out this year that I feel like everyone and their mother read. It was amazing, one of my favorite Emily Henry stories, and I really love the main character, the male character Miles in the story. And then I also have Daniel from Part of Your World, which is the first Abby Mendez book that I read, and I really loved Daniel because he was so many things, and he was so many more things than just being this puppy dog main character for the female lead. I hate stories where the man just drops everything and doesn't have any goals or ambitions except getting the girl. I think that is very, I mean, all of the rom-coms are unrealistic, let's be honest, but I think that's just unrealistic on a new scale. Would be a huge just like turn off for me in general. Someone who has ambition, someone who has a future, someone who can do things for themselves and creating a relationship where you're a part of each other's lives, you are not dependent on each other, if that makes sense. Like, they should complement your lives. You shouldn't change your entire life for them and drop everything you're doing just for them. And I feel like Daniel, because he does so much for the community, he does so much for the people around him, and he has this woodworking thing. There's so much going on that he is his own person who also just loves Alexis so much. And I really like Daniel for that. Book that made me cry. We could say A Court of Wings and Ruin. I don't know if I cried, but it was definitely probably the saddest book I read. I'm not a big book crier. You really have to work for me to cry from a book. I'm sad for sure, but for me to actually cry from it, you have to really work for that as an author, and I don't think any books this year have really truly made me cry. Book that made you happy? I mean, there's a ton. If we just look back here behind me, all of these books are books I kept because they did make me happy. So the ones I read this year, we already talked about Canadian Boyfriend, we have The Nanny, The Breakup Tour, Funny Story, Lease on Love, Part of Your World. So many different books that made me truly happy this year. Most beautiful book I've bought so far this year? I don't know if there is one. I can't say I've bought any books this year that really have pulled me in. I love pretty covers, of course, but I don't buy special editions normally because they are so much more expensive and I'm here for the content. Of course, I love when a book looks nice on my shelf, but I haven't gone out of my way to purchase any really pretty books this year, unfortunately. What books do you need to read by the end of the year? Where do I start? If I could finish up my TBR, that would be awesome. I know that's not realistic and I don't think I'm going to, but I'm looking at my TBR right now over here. I have The Siren by Catherine St. John. That's one I would really love to finish. Stephen King Fairy Tale. I want to try that in the fall because I am not a horror person, so reading that as my first horror book I think would be really fun. All the romance books on my shelf there. I have Raiders of the Lost Heart, Night Shift, Last Chance Library, The Magic of Lemon Drop Pie, Till There Was You. Red String Theory and Lunar Love are ones that I've really wanted to read for a while. I'm so glad I have physical copies of those now so I can dive into that. I actually also received my first 2 ARCs, which I'm really excited for. They were Kindle downloads, but I'm really excited to read those as well. Let me grab my Kindle and we can talk about those quick. So this is my Kindle Paperwhite. I was graciously given 2 downloads of 2 ARC books that were both on my Goodreads TBR, which has me really excited. So I was sent Rise and Divine by Lana Harper. I'm really excited for that one, and then Haunted Ever After by Jen DeLuca. Both ones I do want to read in the month of August, so getting those done, of course by the end of the year, but even by the end of the month would be really exciting for me because I did get those ARCs. That makes me honestly even more excited to read them because someone wanted to give me the opportunity to be able to read those sooner and did really want me to read them and be able to talk about them. So I want to be able to do that for them, for the publishers, for the authors, to let them know my thoughts and what I think, because they were so gracious as to give me the opportunity to do that. And that's the book tag. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your current read down in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.